The podcast you are listening to is Based in Fact, a true crime podcast. Join host Lisa O'Brien as she examines America's most infamous true crime cases through the lens of the court, not the court of public opinion. No rumors, no spin, no theories, just fact. Here's Lisa O'Brien.
In episode 10, I'm talking to Joe Nevils and Natalie Voss Nevils about horse racing and the 148th Kentucky Oaks and Kentucky Derby set for May 6th and May 7th, 2022. As some of you know, I've loved horses and ponies all my life, and I've been a fan of horse racing since Secretariat won the Triple Crown in 1973. I've experienced the joy of seeing 5 Triple Crown winners in my lifetime, and the heartbreak when young horses like Ruffian, Eight Bells, and Barbaro can't be saved after an injury. Our lives have highs and lows, but we keep moving forward, and horse racing is no different. Those connected to the industry do what they do because they love the horses and they love the sport. Our first guest, Joe Nevils, is a bloodstock editor at the Pollock Report, a turf writer, Arabian enthusiast and expert, and Eclipse Award winner for his feature article, Biting the Dust, A Long Goodbye to Mount Pleasant Meadows. Joe's love for horses comes from his family's Belgian draft horses and his grandfather's thoroughbreds who raced on Michigan tracks. Our second guest is Natalie Voss Nevils, 3-time Eclipse Award-winning writer and editor-in-chief at the Pollock Report, who has embarked on a new journey with OTTB _ lovingly known as Blueberry. Natalie's 2020 Eclipse Awards were for articles in both the writing and feature commentary categories. Her feature article was titled An Angel on His Shoulder. This thoroughbred's fate was written in ink. And good afternoon, Joe and Natalie. Welcome.
Good to be here.
Happy to be here.
Great. Well, let's get started. First of all, I want to let you guys introduce yourselves if there's anything in the intro that I didn't include. Now is your time.
I think you tagged all the pertinent bases for me. You kind of hit everything that people need to know, methinks.
Okay.
Well, I think that my draft cross mare Jitterbug would really object to being left out of my intro.
True. That's true.
But
But you know, I felt like she's moved on to her new place and she's no longer tied to you.
That doesn't matter.
Well, she simultaneously wants to continue claiming credit for me and also pretending like she doesn't know who I am when I show up to visit her on the weekends. So
Jitterbug, my dear, my sincerest apologies. She has moved on to a wonderful career with I can't remember. I can never remember the name of the.
It's Central Kentucky Riding for Hope, which is a therapeutic riding center based at the Kentucky Horse Park. So she just moved over there the beginning of this year, and she's already been part of a horse show for them. They had a special modified dressage class at one of the combined test events at the horse park that they took some students to, and she's been teaching students of all ages and all needs for several months now. She's completely a star over there. All the volunteers love her, and it's like the easiest job she's ever had because most of it's just sort of walking and standing still. So she's convinced she should have been doing this from the beginning.
And she's apparently the lift does not bother her at all. So
yes, they were particularly interested in her because they didn't have a larger horse. They didn't have as many larger horses in their program at the end of last year, and they did not have a ton who were also okay with the wheelchair assistance lift, where it sort of helps lift somebody who's uses a wheelchair, lifts them out of the chair and then moves them and lowers them over onto the horse. And the horse has to kind of stand under this big sort of moving arm, and it's this kind of, I don't know that it's a noisy apparatus, but it's making some noise, and there's a person in the air, and it's kind of a lot for a lot of horses. And
it goes on behind where they probably
they can't
are
see
not real
fully.
Crazy.
And she apparently just kind of, they obviously tested it out with her with some staff members several times before bringing a therapy student in, but Apparently she just kind of looked at it and looked at them like, what?
Yeah.
Why are you staring at me? This is fine. So she rolled with the punches.
That is so jitterbug.
It really is. You know, she's been a challenge for me in many ways, but when it really counts the most, she's just absolutely worth her weight in gold, and she's very heavy. So that's
Yes.
pretty
Quite a bit of gold.
Yeah, quite a bit of gold.
So, and again, you both are with the Pollock Report. Joe as Bloodstock editor. And, you know, for my true crime listeners, can you give us a little bit about what a Bloodstock editor, what Bloodstock means in horse racing?
So Bloodstock is basically the factory for horse racing. It's my main beats are covering the horse auctions and pedigrees, breedings, stallions, things of that nature. You know, if it's the things that supply the race horses for the racetrack, whether that's, you know, conception, foaling them out, selling them, raising them, you know, all of that sort of falls under my purview. You know, I do a lot of stuff with auctions. Pretty soon we'll be having a sale in Baltimore following the Preakness Stakes for 2-year-olds, which is kind of it's almost like a, you know, the NFL draft or something where they do a breeze, like a 1 furlong sprint, and everyone, you know, checks on their form and their time and everything and makes their purchases based on that. And those horses could run later this year. They have yearling sales, which is kind of like drafting high schoolers. And then they have sort of weanling sales in the fall, which is, you know, trying to pick out like an elementary school horse basically to run at some point. And they also sell brood mares at this point. You know, a lot of sort of commercial viability type stuff is what I cover. You know, if the numbers are up at sales, if the numbers are down at sales, same with, you know, breeding statistics. You know, once a racehorse retires from the racetrack, they enter the bloodstock realm. So they're, if they're, you know, assuming they're not gelded, if they're an intact horse. So, you know, they'll be becoming a stallion, they'll be becoming a brood mare, and then they sort of fall under my watch.
Wonderful. And Natalie, your work at Pollock Report is in regulatory and features, and you kind of are a jack of all trades there.
Yeah,
or Jill of all trades.
I've inherited a number of beats that don't necessarily strictly relate to each other, but I've been doing them long enough, and they've sort of grown. So I do a lot of regulatory stuff, a fair amount of legal stuff, which has become more and more relevant in the last couple of years as horse racing has been at the center of various criminal and civil cases that are ongoing. And then I also sort of do the horse health and aftercare side of things as well. Because that's sort of where I guess that half I sort of like where I have my hands-on experience with horses, and then the regulatory, legal, investigative stuff is kind of what I became interested in when I started this job, like almost 10 years ago. So I've just sort of kept the two sides going, and then obviously as editor, I'm overseeing a lot of our other types of content as well. So I frequently have to sort of like make lists to keep myself organized, and very often do the digital version of walking into a room and forgetting why I came in there because I'm doing several different things at one time, and they're relatively different things. But it works. Our staff is really great in that everybody sort of has their niche or niches that they specialize in, and together it all fits and works out.
Yeah. And I have to say, I mean, each of you are phenomenal writers.
Well, thank you.
Come in. I wanted to be a writer, but I could not make a living doing it. And so I had to go into legal work and being a legal assistant. So
you probably made the right choice. That's
you did. You absolutely did.
But
it is not easy or secure making a living as a writer.
No, but you seem to have found your success. Because I would say winning Eclipse Awards, that's a success. Isn't that like the Pulitzer of racing sports?
It is, but there's no cash with that prize, which is tough.
Oh,
yeah. It's a very nice trophy, and probably if I took it to the pawn shop, I'd probably get a fair bit of money for it. But
unfortunately, it's not quite on the level of the Pulitzer.
For me, it's my own Pulitzer. After I got the phone call that I won mine, I was on such an adrenaline high that I went out and just like ran 2 miles just non-stop, just because I was so excited about it. And if this is not a visual podcast, but if you saw a picture of me, you saw that you would see I'm clearly not a runner. I do not have a runner's frame. 2 miles was not something I would normally do.
Oh, that's okay. Maybe someday you will. You never know. My ex-husband, when I was married to him, wasn't a runner. He didn't have a runner's frame. He was what you might call doughy. And then after we split up and he had a little health issue, he got his crap together and he actually lost a lot of weight and toned up and looked very good. Luckily, he was the same person, so it didn't catch my interest. So we remained apart. But you never know. You might take to running, and even with nothing chasing you. So
you never know.
Yeah, you never know. And Natalie, your, of course, aftercare is a very big thing for you. You're very invested in it emotionally and work-wise, and you have taken on a new journey with Underscore, a retired thoroughbred who is known as Blueberry.
Yes, absolutely. We're about to start our second horse show season together. Last year, we did the Retired Racehorse Project Thoroughbred Makeover, which is a training competition for thoroughbreds in essentially their first 9-10 months in training for a new career. And that was kind of our bucket list goal for our first season. And we came, we saw, we participated, we finished pretty well. All things considering, we certainly did not win, but we did pretty well in a really big dressage group. And so this year we're just gonna try to keep building on that with our dressage kind of goals. And then he's also learning to jump with my trainer. I have some anxiety about jumping, but I think that it would be a good thing for him to learn a new skill. And so I'm trusting him to the trainer who's brought both of us along to this point, because she's a professional and very confident. And so hopefully it'll be something that he can have fun doing. And then if I decide I want to do it, then it won't be new to him, which seems like a much better entry point for us. So he's very busy these days between those two different things.
But he looks good. He's in such good shape now because he's almost every day he's working. He's doing
and
something.
he likes it that way. He doesn't like to have more than a day or so off. He gets very fidgety. He gets very grumbly, and I think that's from the racetrack he's used to.
You've mentioned that a couple times in your Facebook posts, keeping us all apprised of his progress, and he seems to take to things like it's no big deal for him.
He's very, very smart. I think that I've been lucky to have two incredibly intelligent horses. I think that I'm hard pressed to say that any horse that I've met is smarter than Jitterbug, but he's probably up there. The difference being that he doesn't work to use his smarts against you. He's just a very good boy. It's important to him to be a good boy. He doesn't ever want to do anything to offend you, but he understands things very quickly. So it's very simple to teach him things. And because he has the thoroughbred body, he also can build fitness really quickly. So it's been kind of an adjustment process for me to get used to. Like, I'll start off the week working on something and think, okay, so we'll just sort of keep focusing on this over the next 4 or 5 rides. And then in a couple, he's already got it. So I've got to figure out something else to do, because the concept was easy and we just needed to put the muscles behind it. Once we got that, we were good. So that's been quite a different experience.
And Natalie had a bit of an advantage working with Blueberry because she worked with his mother as a yearling at the sales. So that's the kind of thing where she got sort of accustomed to that family's mentality, I guess, and hopefully knew what to expect with Blueberry, and he absolutely lived up to the hype.
Yeah, and he's an Uncle Mo as well, isn't he?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, they seem to be very solid, very good overall, all around. Athletic horses.
And I have yet to hear anyone say, "Oh, watch out for that crazy Uncle Mo over there," like you would for certain, stallions or bloodlines. Like, it seems like the Uncle Mo's have pretty good heads on their shoulders, all told.
And the tappets, you have to walk them with a helmet. on
Listen, you said it,
because they're
not me.
very high strung.
They can be a challenge. They're smart.
Nothing
but they can be a
nothing wrong
challenge.
with that, but they're very high strung.
Mhm.
And the Uncle Mo's are solid and even.
And the funny thing is, I've seen countless Uncle Mo's because he's one of the most active stallions in North America. He puts 200 foals on the ground every year, and almost to the number, they're all very dark brown, and they're all very leggy, tall, bulky, like linebacker types. And Blueberry is not exactly that. He's probably the shortest Uncle Mo I've ever seen, and he got his mother's a chestnut, so sort of a reddish color, and he's got sort of a copper penny tone to him. Like, he's still considered a bay, so sort of lightish brown, but if you get him in the sun, you can still see the red hairs kind of come through on him. And where a typical Uncle Mo is 16 hands, 16-1, 16-2, Blueberry is 15-2 maybe. So that's to compare that to human heights. Blueberry's maybe, I don't know, 5'8", 5'9", where the typical Uncle Mo is 6'3". So
right,
we're not really sure how he happened, but we always tell him he's the perfect size. Like, this is exactly what we want out of him.
Daddy stamps you in the good way, but not necessarily physically. The way he stamps all his others.
He got the mind, and that's what's important.
Yeah. So, and then of course we've spoken about Jitterbug, and she's doing well and thriving, and that's wonderful. And then we kind of touched on the Eclipse Awards. But Natalie, if you could tell us about your three, not that there's a competition or anything.
So I do have to butt in with one small story on this. My parents were in town from Michigan, and Natalie had just received her second and third Eclipse Awards, and she has them on this nice shelf in her office. And we were showing them off to her, and then they came over and looked at my one Eclipse Award and looked at me and said, "We still love you, son."
I love that.
So
they're so funny. I love my in-laws. They're just the greatest. Well, yeah, so I let's see. God, what year did I get the first one? It's so bad that I don't immediately remember. I wrote the story in a different I wrote the story in a different year from when I won it, because the eligibility for publication date starts like November, December, and then you submit November of the following year. So I always get a little confused. But the first one was kind of an investigative piece on chronic head trauma in jockeys. That was around the time that we were starting to really talk about that issue in football players and what the effects of repeated concussions might be with the CTE and that kind of thing. And I spoke to a rider, a retired rider who, as far as I'm aware, is the first person, or at least at the time was the first ex-jockey who had been told that, like, they can't really diagnose CTE while the person is alive. At least I think that's still true. They're working on changing the imaging modalities to change that. But she was the first person I'm aware who'd been told, like, we can't confirm this because you're still living, but you absolutely have this. Like, there's no way you don't have this. And so I was sort of reviewing, like, what policies are in place to try to protect jockeys. Do we have concussion protocols in the sport? Not really. Unfortunately, I think that we've improved on that somewhat in the years since I wrote that piece, but I don't think that it's become a national sort of uniform policy of trying to prevent or have a procedure in place for a concussion after a rider falls. I think it depends very much on where you are state-wise and track-wise as to whether that's improved at all. And then the two that I got in 2020 were both for aftercare related stories. There was the feature that you mentioned on a thoroughbred who found his way back to the assistant trainer who had him, or who had actually galloped him when he was a 2-year-old, had him in the barn at the very beginning of his career. He'd sort of fallen through the ranks. He'd fallen off the map a little bit. She hadn't been able to find him. And then he turned up in her riding barn one day because he was there as an adoptable horse with the aftercare program that was based at that stable. So sort of looking back at the people that had hands on him throughout his journey and kind of what brought him back to the person who really started with him. And then the other award was for a multi-part series on aftercare, sort of looking at, 10 years or so into the industry focus on aftercare. There's been aftercare organizations around longer than a decade, but we're kind of a decade into really commonly using that phrase, commonly investing in that topic. So what are we doing well? What are we not doing well? What do we need to be looking at going forward? Because the effort to improve aftercare for thoroughbreds certainly has not been completed. The whole thing is not solved. So looking at what we've done successfully and what still lies ahead. So.
All right. Now, how would you feel about a centralized, because I know there's a lot of talk, Dr. Brian Langlois, one of the other friends of mine on Twitter who's into horse racing, he's talked about a centralized, almost a federal regulatory body that would regulate racing across the country. So all the rules would be the same, whether you're in Kentucky or Louisiana or Florida, and across the board, everything would be one set of rules. How would you feel about that type of I guess, system?
Well, so I think what he's probably been talking about the most is the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Authority, which is something that's starting actually July 1st. There was a federal bill or federal law, I guess I should say, passed into 2020, I believe, that had been, some version of it had been in the legislature many times before, but it hadn't really gotten much traction. Popped up in late 2020, passed very quickly, and said, okay, we're going to create this authority. We're going to have rules that are all the same. The authority is going to be housed under the Federal Trade Commission, and go July 1st, 2022. We're going to start this whole thing, which was not a lot of time, because they needed to decide who was going to be on the various boards of this authority, who was going to be employed by the authority, figure out what the rules were that were going to now apply to everyone, figure out
how they were going to pay for it,
and figure out how they're going to pay for it. They still haven't figured out how they're going to pay for it. So the first part of it, they've now divided it into kind of parts that they're going to phase in. So what will begin in July is the safety, integrity, or I guess just the safety, the racetrack safety half of it will begin July 1st, where you'll have uniform rules in areas that are considered to impact safety. So not medication. Medication is going to be held off until probably the start of next year. But anything else that involves the running of a race and the safety of racehorses is going to have uniform rules that go into effect in July. There will also be an accreditation program that racetracks are required to comply with, that is basically a sort of a synthesized version of a couple of different organizing bodies' recommendations that they've been making to racetracks for many years about, here are some best policies that we've seen that work to reduce injuries. Here's the level of equipment that you need, that kind of thing. And that accreditation sounds like it's going to be sort of phased in. There's going to be kind of some tapering to who gets grandfathered into that and who has to sort of get their act together a little bit more quickly to maintain the accreditation they're now going to be required to have. And everyone is a little bit, I've been a little bit, I guess I'm hopeful, but not necessarily an optimistic person.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping this will go really well. We really need this to come together and solve some of these gaps in the country where there are still racetracks that don't have some of these basic rules in place that have been told for years they need to have some of these rules in place. We would really benefit from a uniform medication set of rules and also testing standards. That would be really great. We've needed that for many, many decades now. But it seems like this has been a very rushed effort, and there is still a lot of confusion about how expensive this is going to be and who's actually going to end up footing the bill for it, and whether certain states and certain tracks are going to be able to afford to foot the bill for it. So I'm hoping that it will help. We could really use the help and the uniformity and the tougher sort of sanctions on people that violate the rules. But I am not encouraged that it seems to be such a tremendous process and it's being it's got a very tight time clock on it. I think that's going to make it really tough.
Right. All right. Well, look forward to reading more about it in the Pollock report, because I'm sure you'll be keeping an eye on it.
Absolutely. I've read way more pages than I care to of proposed regulations and comments and everything else. So we'll be keeping everyone informed as that moves forward.
So, and then you've also covered some of the, I guess we call it scandals with medication and testing. And we've had disqualification of the Lake Medina Spirit from the 2021 Kentucky Derby, and replacement of Mandaloun as the winner. And now Bob Baffert is pretty much done, I would think.
Bob is never done.
Yeah, I wouldn't count on that.
He doesn't know
wouldn't-
he's done, but I think he should just retire.
I don't think he has any intention of doing that.
That's not realistic.
At the end of his 90 days, he'll be back. He still has a number of ongoing court cases related to the Medina Spirit outcome.
Mhm.
To my knowledge, he's not dropped his actual appeal yet of that disqualification.
Mhm.
His primary focus had been appealing the suspension that he was handed as a result of the medication overage in Medina Spirit. He's been forced to now begin serving that suspension, so that part of it is moot. However, I think that he and the owner, to my knowledge, are still appealing the fact that the horse was disqualified. Whether they'll continue moving forward with that at this point, now that that part of the ruling has kind of been separated from the suspension, I'm not sure if they'll continue with that, but currently they have not dropped it. He's also still in a civil suit with Churchill Downs, which had exercised its private property rights to ban him from their track and the Kentucky Derby for 2 years. So obviously he's not going to be participating this year because he's on suspension right now, but that would still impact next year. So I don't think he's going to drop that suit because he will want to get in next year. NYRA is still in the process. The New York Racing Association is still in the process of determining how long they might exercise a private property ban on him as a result of a series of medication overages that sort of culminated with Medina Spirit. They're still kind of going through their process to decide exactly how long they're going to keep him out. And I don't know whether he will try to go back to civil court again to try to get around that. He's already sort of done that once. And then he's still at the center of a few different class action civil suits from horse players who bet on Mandaloun and are, trying to get some sort of relief from him, saying it's your fault that I didn't get paid, which is not typically how this is really understood to work, but none of this is really typical. So I'm not really sure where those cases are going to go.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see how those play out.
And through all of this, he has a core group of very deep-pocketed owners that have stood by him through basically thick and thin at this point. They have transferred some horses now that he's been on officially suspension. They've had to transfer horses, and some of them have put horses in other people's barns for the purpose of running in the Kentucky Derby and earning Derby qualifying points. But it's pretty heavily implied that as soon as his suspension is up, they're going back to Bob, and I think they've done, they pay Bob for his services. So they sort of have a hand in keeping him going in some of these legal, battles, because they're essentially paying the lawyer fees because they're putting money in Bob's pocket. Bob's putting the money in the lawyer's pocket. So, it's in their interest to make sure that he keeps going.
So do you think that the improvement of testing methods has caught perhaps practices that weren't detected before? Because it seems like since 2018, he's had some close calls. We had Justifies Santa Anita, but that was put down to environmental contamination in the straw at the track. Because it was several barns, several different trainers, similar positive result. But do you think he's been doing it all along and he just hasn't gotten caught, or do you think it's something he's begun doing, or is it just new testing methods have caught smaller smaller amounts of.
Well, I think that it's sort of hard to say. I mean, the supplement, I mean, the substances he's had problems with the last several years are common therapeutic drugs that have been regulated, for most of his training career to some degree. I think that the rules around those substances have shifted in the time that he's been training. And I know in the case of the betamethasone in Kentucky, when he had the overage with Gamine, who came second in the Kentucky Oaks in 2020, they had just changed the regulations for corticosteroids. I want to say maybe 2 months before that. And they did let trainers know. They worked really hard to publicize that change so that no one would get caught out and surprised by the shift backwards in the last administration time. And obviously then he had a problem with the same substance a few months later in the same state. So there's probably like some degree of gray area. There are certainly trainers who believe that really any testing that goes on now is just way too sensitive. It's past the point of being useful. Now it's just kind of a race to see how small of an amount of something that you can possibly find. And it's sort of lost the thread of being practical. Then there are people who kind of say, like, hey, maybe this is just a matter of us getting better at figuring out what people are doing to push the envelope, and we don't want them doing that. So a more sensitive test, as long as it's sort of balanced with appropriate rules, could be a good thing. And probably the reality lies somewhere in the middle. I do think that there are much more sensitive testing methods used now in some states. I don't think all states have the same degree of testing, but they're getting there. But with the environmental contamination, usually that argument comes in when there's an environmental contamination case specifically, is that people will say, now it's picking up stuff that's in the stall, the stuff that's in the air, stuff that's in the city water. I don't really have any particular perspective on the scopolamine case with Justify, but I know that what testing experts say to people who start blaming environmental contamination in other situations, when they're talking about more sort of out there theories about, it's in the dust and the cobwebs of the stall, or it's in the city water or whatever, they'll say, yeah, but there's other trainers who don't have this problem. So how is it the testing is only catching this environmental tiny indetectable or now detectable level in some cases, but not others? And I think that that's a really good point. So there are obviously trainers that even as the testing gets more detailed and even as the rules shift, are able to shift along with it and make sure that whatever they're doing is not going to put them at danger of getting a positive test. And it's a little unfair to the guys who work really hard and successfully do keep their records very clean to say, oh, well, I just can't keep up with it. The testing is too harsh and the rules keep changing and I just can't figure it out. Well, it's unfair to the guys who do manage to do that.
Yeah.
And the thing is, you can only test for what you know is out there. There are all sorts of things that are even marketed as will not show up in a test. And that's another sort of game of whack-a-mole that, the testing process is constantly trying to keep up with, is new products on the market, things that, state government or, whatever lab you might be employing isn't necessarily looking for, because they don't know that you can, take the slime off a frog and use that to, dull pain and make your horse go faster or go longer. Like it's the kind of stuff that, horse trainers, especially the less credible ones, can be quite innovative. And that's not necessarily a good thing.
Right. And there is, I think, a court case with just that criminal case where they were kind of colluding on what they could get away with, and they were caught on tape.
You got to narrow it down. There's so
many. 2020.
many.
I'm betting you mean the 2020 federal indictments.
Yeah. So, but what I was referring to, the article about the Justify result specifically, there was a counter article that came out, and I think it was NBC, and they talked about basically there were multiple barns at Santa Anita with multiple horses, because not all horses are tested at the same time.
Right.
And so, but it was multiple barns, same results for scopolamine. They had differing amounts, but it was also theorized that the horses were ingesting from the straw.
Mm-hmm.
And it processes through the urine.
Right.
So that was where I kind of felt like that was a credible argument for environmental rather than deliberate administration.
Well, and I do think that's a little different than, somebody who ends up with like a corticosteroid in a horse and tries to say, oh, it's, I don't know, it's environmental contaminant. Like, this traces to a particular weed that is known to sometimes grow in California. And I think that the prevailing sort of theory by the CHRB, the California Horse Racing Board at that time, was that if we're seeing levels of it in other horses in other barns who all have the same hay and straw supplier, it does seem like that batch might have had some of the weed in there. And maybe you had some horses who were more interested in eating the straw than others. Maybe you had some that metabolized it differently than others. But it's not like you just sort of have this one horse that you're trying to say got exposed to a weed that was buried inside one bale of straw. That's, I think, a little bit different. I think the issue that a lot of people had with that case was more that it was really, there was a big effort to hide that from the public.
Right.
They took that hearing with him private. They never published the results of that drug test ahead of that hearing. They sort of dismissed the whole thing in the private hearing with Baffert, and I think probably hoped that it would never come up again. And so then when records did come out indicating that this had happened and that's how it had been handled, I think that kind of had people really suspicious about, like, well, wait, why was he treated this way with this particular horse who ended up winning the Triple Crown? And I think it was more of a transparency issue that a lot of people have with that situation than anything else.
Correct. And the appearance of impropriety made it look worse than had they said, this is what happened, this is how we handled it, this is how we're going to handle it.
Right.
And, but ahead of the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah, it potentially could have swung a Triple Crown. Like, if they had, been more, I guess, public with things, handled. I don't know if they could have been able to handle it quickly enough and judiciously enough to keep him out of the Kentucky Derby if everything were to happen. But, that's something that's kind of a what if at this point.
Right.
And I feel like one of the big arguments that, I've heard people ask, why is everyone always picking on Baffert? Why does everyone seem to be, going after him on stuff like this? And it's that what happened with the Jimson weed with Justify, what happened to Medina Spirit in the Derby, what happened to Gamine and the Oaks clearly isn't an isolated issue. Like, this stuff sort of keeps happening to him. And even if you take him at face value, he's either the most unlucky trainer in the world that he keeps getting popped for circumstantial things in different years, different racetracks, different jurisdictions, or looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, sounds like a duck. Like, it's the kind of thing where it just sort of keeps happening, and eventually he's either got plenty of excuses or you stop buying the excuses. And I think a lot of people have kind of gotten tired of the excuses.
Because weren't Gamine and Medina Spirit, didn't he try to argue that Jimmy Barnes had pain patches?
Different Gamine.
Okay.
Drug positive Gamine unfortunately had two different drug positives.
See what I'm talking about?
So that was Gamine and another trainee of his, Charlatan, got overages for lidocaine in Arkansas earlier in 2020 on Arkansas Derby Day. And in that case, he attributed I think at first he attributed the positives to a over-the-counter pain relief patch that his assistant trainer was using. Later, like well after that, when he was in the hearings with the New York Racing Association and they were bringing up his medication history, he sort of seemed to back off that as the explanation. Like, he still thinks that might have been it, but then there were all these inconsistencies that came through with the Arkansas lab. And then he kind of sort of threw a little bit of doubt out there about, well, I think it was probably the pain patches, but I don't know, the testing situation down there isn't very good. And I don't really know what happened, but I know that we didn't give horses lidocaine. And it is a pretty stupid drug to try to cheat with because it's pretty easily detected. But at the same time, like, I have a feeling there are other grooms and assistants who have to use salon pass patches because like working with horses is really hard on your body. So it would seem a little surprising to me if this was the only time this had ever happened as the result of a topical patch. I guess maybe it's not. I guess it could have happened in other situations that we don't know about, but this is not kind of a known thing. Like, oh, don't buy salon pass because it'll get your horse a positive test. So that was a little bit weird. And no, so then Gamine is the same filly that ended up having the betamethasone positive after the Oaks several months later. So different substance.
Which one got attributed to poppy seed bagels?
That was many years ago.
Okay.
I'm not as familiar with that situation, but that was before my time. But yeah, one of them got attributed to the poppy seeds in a bagel that somebody, I don't know if they fed the horse. I don't remember what the story was exactly, but yeah, there was a poppy seed bagel explanation at some stage that I'm less familiar with.
All right. Well, that's why I say Bob Baffert needs to he's got 2 Triple Crowns. He's probably got more money than God. Retire and pass it on to Bodie.
Well, he might not have more money than God at this point with the lawyers' fees he's been paying.
Well, not if the owners are paying.
He's got 2 lawyers fighting battles on so many fronts right now.
Yeah, I can't imagine how much it's costing.
So, well, it would depend. Maybe they're friends of his, and usually the friends will do things on the cheap. So
you never know.
Could be. I know they've put a lot of hours in at this point.
Are they in California state? Are they in federal?
So I think most of the proceedings that are still active are all federal at this point. The situation with Naira had been in a federal court. Now it's like a private sort of not arbitration. It's like a private hearing that Naira has laid out the ground rules for, and now it's just kind of contained with them. So that part is not part
more
of
administrative than
right. Like they had gone to civil court, federal civil court over Naira's exclusion of him, saying you can't just do that. You have to at least like talk to me. You can't just sort of tell me we're kicking you out based on something that happened in another state. And the judge sort of said, well, he does have a right to due process. And so Naira came up with this set of guidelines wherein they would appoint an administrative law judge to hear a case, not dissimilarly to the way the Gaming Commission might do as part of an appeal. And then they would present a report to a panel, and the panel would make a determination on behalf of Naira what they're going to do. And it sounds like that's something that Baffert is the first one to go through that process, but it sounds like there are other trainers now that they are looking to exclude in a similar way, but have not actually started those proceedings yet. So a lot of the public reaction so far to the Naira Baffert not private, but the Naira Baffert sort of administrative law judge thing was like, well, but these are the guidelines that Naira set out. So like, why are we going to be surprised when Naira says that, yes, in fact, we are still going to kick you out? And it's like, well, yeah, but I mean, he also sort of had to agree to this. So I'm not really sure where that's going to end.
They would probably have arbitration clauses in any of their contracts dealings with him that they go through that process. I think it can be, well, sometimes it's binding though. The question is going to be whether it's going to be binding or whether either side can challenge.
They have said in the guidelines that they gave to him, that they also released to the media, that like the decision of the panel at the end of this very lengthy process is final and you may not appeal that. Now, he might, that might mean, as far as he's concerned, I may not appeal that to you, but is his lawyer going to say, well, then I'm going to take that to court and have the court deal with it? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I think that the judge that saw them before when they were in civil court initially on this, I think was okay. It at least seemed like she was okay with this concept of like, all right, there has to be a defined procedure. And then yes, Naira could use its private property rights to exclude somebody as long as the person had due process. So I don't know that leaves the door open for him to challenge as far as she's concerned, but I don't really know.
He may be able to challenge the due process to have a judge decide whether it is legitimate or whether it's not. So that'll be interesting.
Right. And so then we have all these other cases that are sort of, I don't know that they're being held up as they wait to see the outcome of Baffert's, but I know that they're not. One has had a hearing scheduled that's been moved a few times, and the others, I don't think they've even announced a hearing date for them yet. So I kind of think that they've also got whatever they're dealing with him, and then depending on how that goes, then there might be sort of this wave of others that might come after. So there's a little bit of a backlog at this point as we wait to find out what's going on with him, which is true in a lot of different ways in the industry. We're all just waiting to see what happens.
Right.
And that adds a lot of stakes to it, because this is a very high profile test balloon to be sending out there. And this is a very, Baffert's lawyers are very aggressive. Like this, if the New York Racing Association is successful, will galvanize the process to probably, make things very difficult for other, people with offenses to, fight things. But they're going to have to prove this out tooth and nail, because he's not going to go quietly.
Right. And
if you mess up, if you do anything bad and lose it, all these other people you're looking to run out to, they suddenly have an opening of, well, this process doesn't work. Sure, let's do it. I'll beat you in this court.
Yeah. And there's also, but if they're successful, then other Churchill Downs, Kentucky, California can adopt similar procedures if NYRA's successful.
Potentially.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if that happens, if NYRA prevails here.
So, all right. Well, are we ready to go on to the Oaks and the Derby?
Let's do it.
Now that we've talked about the bad stuff.
Oh, we've got plenty of bad stuff.
Yeah. I don't want to weigh down too much. I mean, you can't ignore it, but sometimes you have to just be a little bit more optimistic.
Well, and it is Derby season. There's a lot of positivity in that for a lot of people.
Derby fever is a disease of optimism. Yes.
Yes.
And we're coming out of COVID and pandemic, and now we're going back to normal, I think, as far as capacity and crowds, and for the first time in 2 years that they're going to have, there's a potential for record-setting crowds.
I'd believe it. And selfishly, last year for the Kentucky Derby, they had, I feel like it was half to less than half capacity. And it was actually really nice as someone who had to cover the thing, because usually they have shoulder to shoulder as far as the eye can see, and to get from the press box to the racing surface, you have to elbow your way through a lot of cigar smoke and drunk people and just a lot of obnoxiousness. And this time you can just walk straight to where you needed to go. There was really no one in your way. It was lovely. It was delightful. If every Derby were like that, I'd be all about it. But I understand that Churchill Downs is a business and they have to make money, blah blah blah. So I'm sure they're going to pack the stands, and they're going to have no problem packing the stands.
And this is where I also wonder how racetracks, I mean, maybe not some smaller tracks, but the Churchill Downs, the Pimlicos, the Belmonts, Saratoga, they make a lot of money, because like a drink costs $6 for a bottle of water. They make money in addition to the wagering that goes on. So I don't think that Churchill Downs should be having any problem funding reform.
You'd sure think so, wouldn't you?
But then again, I don't know what their bottom line or their expenses are.
No comment.
So.
They are already accredited with the NCRA's program, so I think that they there will still be costs to HISA, but as far as like what they personally have to be responsible for to get their particular facility up and running, I think that they're probably already in pretty good shape.
Oh, good.
Yeah, they've regularly been sort of with the New York Thoroughbred, the National Thoroughbred Association, their safety and the certification thing Natalie, what
Safety
is
and
that called?
Integrity Alliance.
Yes,
Yeah.
that thing.
Accredited for many years now. So
Yes.
there still will be a bill to pay regardless, because there's the overall costs for implementing the overall rules. But as far as the track specific stuff, I don't think that will be too much of an issue for them.
Well, that's good. So we're going to start with the Oaks, which is this Friday, May 6th, 2022. And the Oaks started in 1875, May 19th, while Churchill Downs was known as the Louisville Jockey Club. It's also in Louisville, Kentucky. The race is for 3-year-old fillies. It's 1 1/8 miles on a dirt surface. A purse of $1.25 million. First wins $750,000.
Not a bad day at the office.
No, not a bad day. But I think it's one of the things that's difficult with racing is you don't make money if your horse doesn't place.
No,
you have
don't.
Your expenses, but you still have to pay all your expenses, but you don't have any income.
Yeah.
So,
no, you're absolutely right. It's a very hard business to make money in. That's there's a lot of very rich people who have spent a lot of money and not gotten a whole lot of it back.
Yeah. And the field is actually pretty interesting this year. We've got a few classic empires. We've got a Curlin. What are your thoughts on the field, Joe?
So for me, the favorite is also going to be one of the biggest wild cards, Echo Zulu, who was last year's champion 2-year-old female. She dominated everyone last year. No one could even touch her. She has only run once going into this year's Kentucky Oaks for this year. She ran 4 times last year, and usually from the start of the year to the Kentucky Derby, Kentucky Oaks, you run 2, 3, maybe 4 times in prep races to build up form, get points, get yourself in, get your horse in good condition, prove that they can hold up against the competition. Echo Zulu only ran once, ran in the Fairgrounds Oaks on March 26th and won like a good thing. Like there was no rust there. So it's kind of a unconventional route the way that she took it, but she has never shown a sign that anyone in this class can touch her. Assuming that she draws well and everything goes to plan, she's going to be your heavy favorite on Friday.
Okay. And she is a gun runner.
Yes.
She is wasn't his wasn't his career kind of similar? That he didn't run a lot, but when he ran.
So he ran well as a 2-year-old. I feel like he won a grade at stakes as a 2-year-old, or at least did pretty well. He ran in that year's Kentucky Derby, took a bit of a break, but he got better as he got older was the big thing. I think he actually ran 3rd in the Derby. I forget off the top of my head. He became Horse of the Year, I believe, in his 4-year-old season. He won some of the biggest races, biggest purses in the world. And he's one that really kept getting better as he was getting going. Last year, Gun Runner set the record for freshman sires in terms of earnings. And I mean, we all expected him to be a good freshman sire, because he was a fine 2-year-old, but not a champion level 2-year-old. This caught a lot of people by surprise that he did that well with his first runners, and they've been continuing to run on as 3-year-olds. It's not like they were flashes in the pan who, peaked early and then didn't show up like a lot of sort of hot freshman sires do. So the sky's the limit for a stallion like Gun Runner.
So, and what do you think about Shotgun Hottie? She's also a gun runner.
Shotgun Hottie. I don't know anything about that one. I haven't seen that one.
She's lower in the field. They list Churchill Downs lists the contenders, I guess you call them, and they kind of rank them 1 through whatever 21 or whatever there are. I guess nominations by points, and so she's further down. I don't think she has as many points, but she's a gun runner.
Yeah. And there's plenty of them. There's, we're going to probably talk about several in the Kentucky Derby too. That's just, they're everywhere. They are absolutely everywhere.
Yeah.
we had a couple grade 1 winners during this 2-year-old campaign last year. They show up in big spots and they win them.
Mhm. And then Adair Manor, she's another one with not as many points, but she is a potential runner Friday. She's an Uncle Mo.
Yeah, that's, Uncle Mo actually, Gun Runner took the record for freshman sire earnings from Uncle Mo.
Oh.
So that's a good group of stallions to be in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Into Mischief is another big very successful sire.
Into Mischief is Thanos. He's inevitable at this point. He has he's been the nation's leading sire by earnings 3 consecutive years. Last year, he set the earnings mark all time for a single season in terms of his progeny. And the crazy thing is, he's going to keep blowing that number out of the water for the next 5+ years. Mm-hmm. He's one of the most active sires in the country. He's prolific. His runners do everything. They win at every level. If you find an Into Mischief on the racetrack, he's probably going to win some races.
Mm-hmm. So, and unfortunately this year I didn't see any American Pharaohs or Justifies, and I haven't been seeing them.
Well, Justify doesn't have old enough runners to run in the Triple Crown races yet. His first foals are just 2-year-olds, so they'll start running this year. And then they should, for as much as people spent to breed and buy them, they sure should be showing up in the Triple Crown Trail next year. As for
how are they doing in the sale rings?
Oh, they're doing gangbusters. That's people have invested so much money in the Justifies because he started out with, I want to say his stud fee initially was 150,000, something in that neighborhood. So the initial investment was high. So usually that tells you that people are going to spend high for their yearlings. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the 2-year-olds are horses that were bought during the yearling sale. So people are going to spend high for the 2-year-olds. Now they got to run. Now they have to prove themselves that they're going to be worth those lofty prices. But he has no excuses. He got a huge book of mares, and I remember seeing the types of mares he bred, and it was an absolute murderer's row. Justify has no excuse not to be a great stallion.
Good. I look forward to seeing his first crop will start running next year.
This year.
Oh, they do start this year. Yep. Okay.
You'll start seeing them as soon as this summer.
Oh, okay. I just hadn't seen, I watched spring racing and I hadn't seen any in the 2-year-olds quite yet, where there's odd 2-year-old race.
Yeah, I think they're going to be a little later types. Justify didn't start running until he was a 3-year-old.
This is true.
It wouldn't surprise me if they take a little time to get going, but it also wouldn't surprise me if they get off the bat real quick too.
Yeah, if they're as big as he is, they should wait until 3 years old.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's a big boy.
So, and then you were about to talk about American Pharaoh.
Yes, American Pharaoh. I forget, he had one that was doing pretty well on the Kentucky Derby Trail this year. I feel like he bounced out eventually.
Yes.
In terms of expectations, if he were any stallion other than American Pharaoh, I think he'd be seen as a rousing success. But he's kind of one like Justify, where people had a certain amount of expectations on him based on the type of mares he got early, based on the type of money they spent. And he's a very good sire, but he's not a top sire yet. He's getting there. He's shown more sort of dirt moxie in the past year or so. He's getting there, but I think people expected him to get there a lot quicker than he has. It's kind of like, it reminds me a lot of Secretariat. His first crops weren't anything out of the ordinary. They were perfectly good. He had some stakes winners. They were great, but people expected him to recreate Secretariat. And I think there are people who sort of expected American Pharaoh to recreate American Pharaoh. And he's had some really good runners. He had a Breeders' Cup winner in his first crop. I believe it was the Juvenile Turf Sprint. It's not like they're not running, but they're not getting classic dirt horses. And that's what American breeders want. He's had good runners over in Japan. He's had excellent runners on the turf. He's been getting good runners, just not the type of good runners that people expected him to based on his own race record.
Correct. I think people were expecting, was it Omaha and the father-son Derby? The father-son Triple Crown, Gallant Fox and Omaha with American Pharaoh. Because I know I did.
Yeah, and I mean, that's anytime you breed to a Triple Crown winner, that's the stated or unstated goal, is that you want a piece of that, that's, that same level of excitement. That's what you're trying to sort of recreate. And, not every stallion, whether it's a Triple Crown winner or just a good stakes winner, is able to do that. He's had plenty of good runners. He is not a dud by any means at all. He just hasn't really had that, the home run Kentucky Derby horse yet.
Right.
Give him some time. I think he does. I think he gets one that, makes noise on the Kentucky Derby trail and will show up and will show himself very well. We just haven't had it yet. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't.
Yeah. And I think it was Forbidden Kingdom that was on the Derby trail.
That's who it was.
And then
That's
recently
I loved him.
had a setback or something that knocked him off the trail.
I knew I was forgetting one that was very obvious. I loved Forbidden Kingdom earlier this year. He was my Derby horse for a good run of time. And, he just kind of ran into, a couple of buzzsaws in the Santa Anita Derby. He came out with a bit of an injury, and the trainer is very much one that's not going to push a horse too hard. So they just put him on the sideline for now. He's going to win a lot of races coming up soon, but he was sort of the breakthrough traditional dirt horse for American Pharoah.
Right.
And I think, come Travers Stakes season, come Pacific Classic season, you'll hear from Forbidden Kingdom again.
Good. And then one of his horses, First Pharaoh, I don't think ever raced, but he is in the second career aftercare arena.
Oh, lovely.
Being trained for eventing, dressage, jumping, whatever. Without ever, I don't think he ever set foot on track.
He didn't. I just pull up his numbers here. But, I bet the American Pharaohs are going to be really good at that. They're very long and athletically built. And American Pharoah himself is just very nicely put together. Like it's not what you want to breed an American Pharoah for, but he's going to have some excellent OTTBs.
And they're very kind, very smart.
Yes.
Very calm, even tempered horses. So that's always a plus when you're in that world where it can be almost as hectic at the grounds when you're showing as it can be at the racetrack.
Most definitely.
So, all right. And then we can, let's see, I have the Oaks, the field, the favorites. So you got Echo Zulu. Any other favorites?
So what I'm going to have my eye on is Secret Oath. This is a daughter of Arrogate, first crop of Arrogate as well, out of a very good mare. She actually ran against the boys in the Arkansas Derby. She ran third, I believe. Ran very respectably. And before that, she was dominating the Philly competition. And it was pretty well implied that, once she went back to Philly, she was going to be one of the favorites for the Kentucky Oaks. And if Echo Zulu had come back rusty, she could have been the favorite for the Kentucky Oaks. I think she's going to show herself very well. She's clearly got chops to run against, potentially tougher competition. That was a pretty good Arkansas Derby field. If she gets the draw, if she gets the trip, she's as live as anyone in this field.
All right. And that draw is at 1 p.m. Eastern time, I believe, tomorrow at Churchill Downs.
Yep.
And you can go to Churchill Downs or Kentucky Derby on Facebook. And if you want to watch, you can watch it live.
And the Kentucky Derby and the Kentucky Oaks are two races where generally I don't really believe that the draw is that big of a deciding factor on whether a horse is going to win a race or not. But when you're dealing with fields this big, especially the potentially 20 horse Kentucky Derby field, where you draw can make the difference between whether you have a potential winner or you're thinking about, oh, what can I do in the Preakness in 2 weeks?
Correct.
There are a lot of really, really good horses that drew the one hole that was an automatic disqualifier. You look at a horse like Looking at Lucky a few years ago, who was probably the best horse in his crop. He drew the inside post, and it's so hard to get out of traffic there because everyone's trying to fight and get onto that rail to get the shortest distance that it's hard to come back from. The inside posts have taken down a lot of great horses. So you always try to hope to get it somewhere in the middle. Even the outside anymore has become a viable spot to go in. But those first 2-3 spots on the rail, not great. You're going to get clobbered. There's no way around that.
Did you see last year an improvement with the new gate? Because the prior Kentucky Derbies, the field was 20. I think the maximum gate was 12 or 13. And so they had another gate with 14 through 20. And every race, every year that I watched, the 14 horse got the crap beat out of him coming out of the gate. Like Mendelssohn, he would have won the Derby if he'd been in any other post, I think, because
I
he
like
was
Mendelssohn.
fast.
Mm-hmm.
But he was in the 14 and he got mugged coming out of the gate.
That's the tough thing with the Derby. Like, someone is going to get mugged coming out of the gate. That's just, you just have to hope it's not the one you've got your ticket on. That's just, that's a tradition of the Derby, as tried and true as mint juleps, is that someone is going to lose their race at the gate.
So they have their new 20 stall gate. Did you perceive any improvement last year?
I don't think there was really that much of a difference. I can't really, off the top of my head, I don't really recall the start of the race thing. I know someone got taken out because someone always does, but I don't think it was because or not because of the gate.
Okay.
I think it's just kind of, it is what it is. It's a little different. It's a little shorter distance for those outside horses to run because, for the auxiliary gate, you have to have the space for the wheels and stuff. So people actually liked to draw around that gate because you had a little bit more, wiggle room around you. And that removed that a little bit, but also then it's a little shorter distance to the finish line. So
right.
I don't know. I don't know if it's good or bad. It's just different at this point.
All right. Well, one night when you're bored, go to YouTube and watch some Kentucky Derbies and watch the starts. One of my favorite ones was Thunder Snow.
Oh boy.
Coming out like a bucking bronco because he apparently did not like the water on the track.
Yeah, that'll happen from time to time. We were on the track surface for that one, and you're always kind of looking to make sure, is the horse all right first and foremost, and then is the horse going to run us over? So it was, the answers were yes and no. Okay.
Well, that's good. Any other favorites on the Oaks?
Those are pretty much my big ones. One that might get a bit of a price that I like a little bit is Hidden Connection. This one took Echo Zulu to the absolute limit in the Fairgrounds Oaks and is a deeper closer. If she gets the trip, you never know. This is another first crop filly from the first crop of Connect. She's a good horse. Like, she's going to win some races. I don't know if it's necessarily going to be the Oaks. It's tough for a closer in those big races because there's so many horses. You have to have the perfect trip to get it done. But I have more faith in her than just about any other mid to high range shot.
Okay. Now, did you have the pleasure of meeting any of these ladies when they were with their moms?
Boy, that's a good question. Not as foals. No, I don't think so. I feel like I would have remembered that, and I don't think I've seen any of them.
Okay. Hopefully one of these foals you're meeting this year. In a few years, we'll be able to say, oh yes, and you would not believe.
I mean, that's the dream. That's basically the goal of anyone that pulls a foal out of a mare, is that eventually that you're saying, I was there for the first moments of the future Kentucky Derby Triple Crown winner. But for the work that I've been doing with Foal Patrol, I've got 4 or 5 different shots at that for between the Derby and the Oaks, and we'll see what happens in a few years.
Yeah. So. All right. And I guess we move on to the Derby now. And the field is currently packed with about 28, but only 20 will make it.
20 get in, then they have a couple wiggle room for also eligibles. So if someone scratches at the last minute, they just sort of slide in, they take the outside post. So, on draw day, they will probably have the actual draw for 20 spots 1 through 20, and then 21 and 22 are the next horses out for points.
Right.
They probably won't run. I feel like only 1 or 2 also eligibles have come off the list to actually run in the main field. But, they'll still probably train up as if they're going to run, because you never know when you're going to get that call.
Right. And I noted in my research this morning, early voting has scratched. Chad Brown announced that today.
Which honestly, probably no big loss. I like early voting, but I don't know if he was the type of horse to get it done here. I think they're probably going to point toward the Preakness for him, and that's probably a better spot.
Yeah. And a lot of different sires represented here. We've got Upstart, we've got Uncle Mo, of course, we've got Tis the Bomb that's not even he's a Tiz now through his mother.
Yes,
There was
he's by
broodmare,
hit a
but
bomb.
yeah, he hit a bomb, which surprised me when I saw that he wasn't a Tiz something horse. But I guess they want to make sure people know he is in that family.
Well, it's kind of like Tiz the Law a few years ago. He was a son of Constitution, but the dam was a Tiz now mare. So they kind of kept that, Tiz the blank.
Yeah.
And his dam is Tiz the Key. So Tiz the Bomb makes sense. It's a good play on words.
And we've got a classic Causeway, who is a connection to the pasture for Glorious Alliance. Hackleton, one of the OTTBs that is now living with them, ready for his second career, is also a Giant's Causeway. They're not really considered brothers.
No, I mean, by the very barest bones of definition, yes, they are, because they share the same parent. But in terms of how the thoroughbred industry views it, a stallion can have up to 200 foals in the course of a year. A mare is only going to have one. So typically, being a sibling is considered on the mare side
only. Yeah.
So if you share a mother, you're a brother and sister. If you share a sire, you just share a sire.
Yeah. I think that
I don't make the rules. That's just the way it is.
Yeah. I just like, Pioneer of the Nile. I love Nihilist. I love Hail to the Nile, who was going to be an NOPD police horse, but he was too hot-blooded.
Yeah, that'll happen. Yeah, you gotta be so calm to be a police horse.
And he was not. Apparently, he during one of the trainings, he took off with his rider because something spooked him.
Oh, geez.
And they weren't sure quite what.
Yeah, it happens.
So, and it's not his fault.
Yeah.
They're most of their horses, I think, a Jitterbug would make an excellent police horse because they're so calm.
We've said that on multiple occasions. Like sometimes we halfway expect like the police ponies, like at the Kentucky Horse Park, that Jitterbug will be amongst them at one point. And she'll be in uniform.
She'll be the chief of police.
Oh, she'll absolutely. There's no other position she would have other than chief of police.
She already thinks she is chief of police.
Yes, she'll be in charge. She will not be involved.
Right, but the successful horses in NOPD squad at least are the draft cross.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were bred at Angola prison when they were in their breeding program. So, cool. But the OTTBs, maybe some. I mean, I think Blueberry might.
In about 10 years, I think.
When he gets older, I think he'll be good. Like he puts up with a lot, but he is still a 5-year-old. There's one corner of the arena where it is never a 0% chance. It's never a high percent chance, but it's never quite zero that he will like spook at his own shadow, depending on what time of day you're riding. And I think, he does just sort of other like little babyish things that I just kind of ignore because he's going to drop that when he gets a little bit older. But I've actually done a few feature stories on police horses because off-track thoroughbreds and off-track standardbreds used to be kind of the go-to for a lot of mounted police forces. But what I learned a few years ago is they've changed over more towards draft crosses, primarily because they have to carry the officers have to carry so much more equipment now, like iPads and extra safety gear and stuff beyond what they used to have to do. So they're preferring like that heavier type of horse, not just for the temperament, but also because like they can kind of take a little bit more of that equipment weight, which I thought was really interesting. I hadn't thought about that before.
Correct. And the draft butt is a lot more intimidating than the thoroughbred butt.
Yeah, although I'm always surprised like non-horsey people find just about any size horse really intimidating to them, which makes sense, I guess. But like to me, it's just like, yeah, this dude's really little. I'm always telling my mom like, oh, Blueberry's so small, and she's like, he looks big to me. Like, well, fair point. He is larger than our cats. That is true.
So, and I think Hail to the Nile was young because I think he was only 5 or 6. So he may have been too young for that.
Yeah, there are certain, ex racehorses where their personalities would fit well with that. A lot of former racehorses become track ponies, that kind of thing, where, I could see it for a lot of them, but usually not until they're going to be, older, more mature, less, gun shy about things.
Correct.
But I bet you see it more than once.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Blueberry's issue would not be so much desensitization as just learning to be bored. Like he's young enough right now that like you stop working him if I sit on him and we stand around for a little while to talk to my trainer, he doesn't really want to stand still. Like he won't do anything too crazy, but he just gets really fidgety. And so that's kind of our big challenge right now as far as like non-ridden stuff, is just learning to stand there and be okay with standing there. And it's boring and you're not going to die like being bored. No one's ever died of boredom. You're going to be fine. And
he could be the first.
Do it. he thinks he's going to be the first every time.
Patient zero.
This is the worst. I cannot stand here. I cannot do this. Like, how dare you not give me something to do? I'm going to find something to do. I'm going to rub my face on someone. I'm going to try to chew at my reins. So like I think that's going to be a longer challenge really to get him through that than any of the other baby stuff that he does. And it's just going to be, he's just going to have to do it. It's just, you gotta be bored sometimes. That's just what it is.
But luckily he's an Uncle Mo, so it won't take him long to eventually figure that out.
Yeah, I think that he understands what I'm trying to get him to do. I think that he just doesn't like it. So he'll get there as he gets more mature, but it's just not his favorite thing now. And
that's like a 5-year-old human.
Yeah, that's sort of how I treat it. Like, no, I'm going to get off only when you're standing quietly. That's so that you'll figure out this is what I want. But like, I'm not going to get that upset about it because you're 5 and this will eventually go away.
So, well, Joe, who are your favorites in the Derby?
So I'm not going to tell you who I have on top because 1, I haven't decided yet, and 2, I'm saving that little nugget of information for my Haiku Handicapper picks on the Pollock Report website later this week.
Okay.
And, you can't give up the secrets. I'm sorry. I would like to very much, but
right.
I gotta stick to my own brand. But I will give you a few that I have my eye on as potential winners.
All right.
First off is Epicenter.
Okay.
Actually from the same connections as Echo Zulu. So they could potentially have the Derby winner and the Oaks winner on consecutive days and have a very good weekend for themselves. Epicenter has won the Risen Star Stakes and the Louisiana Derby coming into this race. Also won at Churchill Downs at 2. So he has experience over the surface. He established himself early as one of the top horses in his division and has beaten an extremely deep group of horses in Louisiana. The Louisiana Road to the Kentucky Derby is probably the deepest division this year. There's New York, there's California, there's Kentucky, there's Louisiana, Florida, and usually they kind of vary on which ones have the most legitimate contenders. And if you think that, diamond sharpens diamond, then you believe the Epicenter is probably going to be your favorite because he beat a lot of good horses on the way to Louisville this year.
Okay.
Another one to keep an eye on is Zandon. He won the Bluegrass Stakes at Keeneland coming into this. He's a deep closer type. If you like those, Churchill Downs has a long stretch. Mind That Bird was a deep closer, Orb was a deep closer. It can be done. It's a little harder to do nowadays. I feel like lately front running trips are your winning trips. You don't have to worry about getting caught in traffic if you're never in traffic. But if someone is capable of getting that closing trip and getting the traffic done, and maybe even overcoming an inside post draw, it could be Zandon. I see him as a type who even his worst version of a trip is going to be hitting the border awfully close to it. He's really matured over the spring, finished second by a nose in the Remsen to end his 2-year-old season, ran a good third in the Risen Star, where he finished second to Epicenter. That was a really good, like I said, that was a really good Louisiana group where, the second horse I'm looking at was in that same race. Who else do I like? Cyberknife is kind of interesting. He won the Arkansas Derby, really matured. He's another one that started his season in Louisiana and, matured running elsewhere to run very well. So the Louisiana path is going to factor into the finish of this race. There's just no way around it. Since we were talking about Bob Baffert horses earlier, he has 2 that were under his care that are likely to enter the race. They have since been moved to the barn of trainer Tim Yaktine. The first one of those is Taiba. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. There's a lot of debate on that. He won the Santa Anita Derby by 2 lengths in his second career start, which is highly unusual to have a horse go into the Kentucky Derby off of just 2 starts. Justify was considered too raw to be a potential winner, and he had run it 3 times. This horse has only run twice. His other one is a horse named Messier, after the great hockey player Mark Messier. He's Ontario bred, so it keeps rolling into each other. He's a son of Empire Maker. He finished second to Taiba in the Santa Anita Derby after winning his season debut, also at Santa Anita, in the Robert Lewis Stakes. He won that by 15 lengths. This one's also in the barn of Tim Yaktine, so he's clearly got the talent. The California path is sort of the opposite of the Louisiana path, and where there weren't a whole lot of killers in that group this year. So we don't know how good those horses really are coming out here, but he beat everyone he needed to. It was 10 lengths from Messier to the 3rd place horse in the Santa Anita Derby. So clearly they're the cream of their crop in California. Whether that translates over to Kentucky is going to be a whole different story. Question's going to be whether he needed to start when he lost the Santa Anita Derby, or if just everyone else was starting to catch up with him. We'll find out very soon.
All right. Now, how do you feel about Crown Prince, the Japanese horse?
Boy, the Japanese contingent has had a fantastic run of about 6 to 8 months. They came over for the Breeders' Cup and absolutely wrecked shop. They won so many races. They did really well on the Saudi Cup card a few months ago. Did extremely well on the Dubai World Cup card. The Japanese racing program has established itself as a program you have to pay attention to no matter where they run on the planet. They will make their presence felt, and they will win a lot of races. That said, I don't think Crowd Pride is going to add to that list today. He won the UAE Derby, earned his spot there, ran very well. He had sort of a grinding closing trip, but I just don't know if it's the type of trip that wins the Kentucky Derby. I wasn't as impressed by him I was hoping to be when I went back and watched the replay. 2 starts earlier, he got absolutely demolished in the Hyacinth Stakes back in Tokyo. And I don't think that was a better field than he faced in the UAE Derby. I'm not that attuned to Japanese racing, but I wasn't impressed by that effort. And if you can't beat the best of Japan, I don't know if you can beat the best 3-year-olds in America.
Right. And Churchill Downs is a bit of a culture shock, I think, for some of the Japanese horses.
They've had notable runners and winners over the years, but it's a culture shock for mostly anyone that runs there. It plays almost kind of turfy. Turf horses that have succeeded on the turf or on synthetic surfaces have historically run really well or better than they should in the Kentucky Derby. Barbaro started his career as a turf horse, and we saw how well he did. Animal Kingdom won his last prep over synthetic surface, and then won at a halfway decent price Kentucky Derby. They usually run a little better than you might expect given their past performance. So it's having turf form isn't necessarily a bad thing going into the Derby. You'd like to have dirt form, especially dirt form over Churchill, but it's not what you necessarily need.
Right. And what about the jockeys?
Well,
what are your thoughts on? We got Mike Smith.
I believe Mike Smith is riding Taiba.
Yes.
I'm pulling up my past performances right now to see if he's ridden him in the past. He has. Yes, he rode him in the Santa Anita Derby. I always like to see a little bit of experience in terms of having ridden a horse in the past. I'd like to see the jock that rode the horse in the prep ride them in the Kentucky Derby, even if that means sticking with a regional rider. There are a lot of riders at some of the tracks who get a winner in, say, the Arkansas Derby or the Louisiana Derby, and then the owners say, well, I want Irad Ortiz riding my horse. I don't want this local rider because Irad Ortiz wins a lot of stuff. And I really believe with Dancing with the Jock That Brung Ya, I feel like it doesn't pan out as well as it usually should when they replace the jockey this late, unless the jock already has a mount somewhere else.
Correct.
Commitments are what they are. Jockeys can only ride one horse at a time. But if you have a perfectly good jockey who's available to you and they've gotten you this far in life, I really don't like the angle of taking them off the horse unless you have a very compelling reason. And that compelling reason can't just be, ooh, that jockey's shiny.
Yeah. And then we've got Joel Rosario, Flavian Pratt, Florent Giroux. But we've got some new faces, I think. Tyler Gaffleone
I feel like
hasn't been at the Derby very many times.
He's a young up and coming rider still, but he's really established himself. I believe did he win the Preakness last year, or was it the year before?
I think it may have been, yeah.
Yeah, he's established himself as an elite rider on the national level. He's come along really well. He's got White Abario in the Kentucky Derby. He's got the mount on him. Gaffleone rode White Abario for wins in the Holy Bull Stakes and the Florida Derby, which were both convincing victories. That's the kind of form you want to see. Eventually, I don't love White Abario in this race. I think he's going to find a ceiling, but eventually Tyler Gaffleone's going to ride a Derby winner. Like that's a sure.
Yeah. And then we've got Raylu Gutierrez, who's going to be the youngest jockey on Barber Road.
Yeah, he's got a good mount in the Kentucky Oaks too. I believe he's riding Hidden Connection, actually, who I was speaking about earlier. That horse might very well win the Oaks. I don't think Barber Road's going to win the Derby. I think he's a very good horse who's probably in over his head here. But, having a Derby mount this young, anything is possible. It's not like it's crazy for sort of a less heralded younger rider to come in here and, win the big one. So once you get a horse in the race, all you got to do is get in there first.
Exactly. And we have the usual.
It's that easy. It's that easy. You just get him in the gate, get him there first.
Get him to the finish line first.
I don't know why more people don't try that strategy.
So.
I'm available for consulting.
And we have a Louisiana jockey, Brian Hernandez.
Mm-hmm.
He is going to be riding Tis the Bomb.
Yes, Tis the Bomb is going to be interesting. I just spent a lot of time rallying about how a turf bred and synthetic bred horse can, do damage at Churchill Downs and, especially in the Kentucky Derby. I'm just not sure how I feel about Tis the Bomb. I feel like his first surface truly is turf and synthetic. He did fantastic in the prep races at Turfway Park, which is a all-weather surface. He won last year's Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf. I'm sorry, he finished second, but he got the winner's share because of a bunch of craziness. He ran second. He paid out first. It's a long story. Horse racing is weird. But his one start on actual dirt in between the Breeders' Cup and the races at Turfway was in the Holy Bull, which was at Gulfstream Park, and he finished 7th by 20 lengths.
Okay.
Then he got on the synthetic and did fantastic.
Yeah.
So I don't know if he's good enough to be a factor here. I say that now and it'll probably make me stick my foot in my mouth when we get to the races, but I will not be playing Tis the Bomb in the Derby.
Okay. Well, that's fair. Fair. Because some horses, you put them on a surface that they don't run on and they don't run well. They don't like it.
And he has the pedigree of a turf horse too. Tis the Bomb, I believe, won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf. It's a pet. Tis the Bomb. Hit it a bomb as a son of Warfront. It's a very turf heavy pedigree. He's kind of going against form to run on the turf, which isn't. To run on the dirt, which isn't necessarily a absolute toss. But if you're looking for reasons to not pick horses, that's as good as one as any.
And of course, the Saturday there are tons of races. What are the other big races on the card for Friday and Saturday?
Oh, for Friday and Saturday, I don't have it in front of me. But typically, they have the Turf Classic Stakes, which is a Grade 1. They bring in a lot of good turf horses for that. That's usually one of the sort of elite level races. The Pat Day Mile is, I believe that's a Grade 3. It might be a Grade 2 now. That's a mile race for 3-year-olds. A lot of horses that made a lot of noise on the Triple Crown Trail, but weren't necessarily the type to get a mile and a quarter will end up here. It's sort of the consolation race for a lot of good horses. So you'll see some familiar names that you probably saw running against the horses that'll be running on Saturday in the Derby.
Okay.
I feel like I could be wrong on here. I believe it's the Churchill Downs Stakes. It's a Grade 1 sprint for fillies and mares. That brings in a lot of good horses. I'm sure Belle's the one will probably be running in that. She's an excellent turf sprinter. I'm an excellent female sprinter. They've really packed these cards. It will be 2 full days of racing, and actually 3 because their Thursday card, they usually put some solid races on too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I used to work with an attorney that would go to the OTB rather, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday for Derby, Preakness, and Belmont.
Yep, that's on the Thursday card. They have a race. It's the Kentucky Juvenile Stakes, which is sort of the first big stakes race in the country for 2-year-olds. So that'll be kind of the, it's rare that horses that peak that early end up running in the Kentucky Derby, but this is sort of your first peek at who's, got the first jump out of the gate in terms of good sires, good runners. You don't learn a lot, but you'll learn something in those races.
Right. And who might shine at the Breeders' Cup?
You never know.
In November.
Everyone's got to get started somewhere.
So, all right. And I put Haiku Handicapper, but I guess since it hasn't appeared in Pollock Report, that's
well, I was prepared for this because I didn't want to share any of my current haiku because that's,
yes,
we got to keep the people coming back for that one. But for people who aren't familiar, I started this thing in college called the Haiku Handicapper because I looked around and realized that I'm a college student, and if I want to stand out with my Kentucky Derby picks, I can't just straight up say who I like. Who cares what a college student thinks about the Kentucky Derby? Mike Watchmaker, Stephen Chris, Andy Beyer have these experienced takes. They have numbers, they have data. I'm just a dude at Central Michigan University. Nobody cares what I have to say about this. So I had to find a different outside the box way to analyze the race. So I came up on my blog, The Michigan Bred Claimer, this thing called the Haiku Handicapper, where I analyze each horse in the race in the form of haiku. Haiku is a 3-line poem, 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables again. And I try to inject a lot of humor into it and really get to the point of how I think a horse is going to do, try to make a joke and move on to it. So I've been doing this for over a decade now for different publications, Thoroughbred Times, Daily Racing Form. Who else? This is Horse Racing. I know I've done it for Arabian Finish Line in the past, obviously the Pollock Report. The picks are usually awful. If you're reading the Haiku Handicapper, it's not because you actually want to know who won the race. You want to hear jokes about these horses. So I do that for typically all 3 Triple Crown races, usually the Breeders' Cup. And basically anytime a sponsor wants to do something, I'm happy to write haiku about whatever race they want to sponsor. So I pulled up what I had for last year's Kentucky Derby. So I can provide a few quick examples.
Great.
Let's see. We'll do Medina Spirit since he was the winner for that one once I find him.
Okay.
Now remember, these lines are 3 lines, 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. So it's going to be kind of weird and disjointed. It reads a lot better on the page than it sounds to the audio. So I encourage anyone listening to this to Google the Haiku Handicapper. It looks a lot better on the page. So Medina Spirit's poem was, couldn't seal the deal once he got the starting gig on Baffert's depth chart. So that didn't pan out, obviously. He ended up winning the race by what means we don't know. But at the time, he had, there were better horses in Baffert's barn who didn't make it to the race for whatever reason. And, he really didn't look like he was going to be that guy, but he turned out being that guy. At least that guy at the time.
At the time, yeah.
My pick for that race was Essential Quality. His haiku was, the unbeaten champ does little else but ace tests. Why would he stop now? And he ran just fine. I think he ended up running 3rd. I think he got promoted to 2nd after the disqualification. Had an outside trip. It is what it is. He's a good horse. He ended up winning the championship at the end of the year anyway. So, that's kind of how I do those. Usually if they're horses that don't have as good of a chance, I'll get a little sort of meaner about my predictions and try to make more jokes about how the horses don't have a chance. Those are the more fun ones to write than the horses that actually have chances.
Yeah. And haiku is difficult to write because I remember in grade school, I had to do one and it took me forever. It's the 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables, very structured.
Yes, you have to have a good command of the language to be able to pull out words that say what you need it to say that also fit the syllable count. And I'll be like sitting in a coffee shop, like counting on my fingers, and people will think I'm crazy trying to like figure out all the syllables. Like I've had people stare at me thinking I had something wrong with me, and I was just trying to like count out a haiku in my head.
So I can imagine.
So that will be out sometime this week. We're still trying to figure out. I like to do it, obviously I want to do it after the draw, so I have the post positions, and I need to figure out who's going to
Right.
win, who I think is going to win the race.
Right. Well, that'd be cool if we do this again for Preakness. I'd like to see the hot sires, what their haikus were.
Yeah, that's
in the big classic races.
Like what they were back in the day, or
like American Pharaoh for Kentucky Derby.
I like that. I'm for the ones that exist and that I know I can find them, I might have to pull those up. I like that. That's
and
worth...
Gun Runner.
Yeah.
Run Happy. I mean, Run Happy must have made a lot of money because he sponsors everything at multiple tracks.
So his owner is Jim McInville, Mattress Mac, who owns it. Yeah, like he's got a lot of money and he's not afraid to spend it. Like,
correct.
He loves a gamble. He's always in the news for placing, $1 million bets on, the World Series, the Super Bowl, or what have you. Like, he's not afraid to put his money where his mouth is on stuff.
And he is also, though, very generous and very charitable, because after storms in Houston, he opens up his stores and lets people come sleep there for free. Where they've lost their homes or lost their possessions. So he's very good. Yes. And I think after Katrina, he put people up in Houston.
I believe he did. I feel like anytime there's kind of a natural disaster that hits the area, the gallery furnitures open up for those who need them. I remember for COVID, he sort of spearheaded a lot of sort of like getting meals to people and just making sure everyone was fed and taken care of in the early months. Yeah.
So he's not that, but it's funny that, it's not Mattress Mac, it's Run Happy. It is a horse sponsoring.
And Run Happy has a horse in the Derby field. He has Smile Happy, who finished second in the Bluegrass Stakes and the Risen Star Stakes. He's coming along at a good pace. I think he probably needs one more I love him for the Preakness. I don't know if he gets it done in the Derby, but I think he's a true threat for the Preakness. That being said, he's got a win over the Churchill Downs surface. He won the Kentucky Jockey Club Stakes last year like a good thing, and that got him on a lot of people's radars. He beat Classic Causeway that day. He beat White Abarrio that day. It's not outside of the realm of possibility that he wins. I like him better in the Preakness, but he's one that I'm not going to completely toss in the Derby. Like, he's absolutely live.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll have to see how he does. And I certainly am looking forward to Haiku Handicapper this week. And your favorite who was not mentioned.
Favorite who shall not be named.
Who shall not be named.
Or maybe it was mentioned.
Shall not be named at this time. That we know of.
Horse to be named later.
But it'll be interesting to see how that pans out on Saturday.
Yes. There's a lot of questions still to be answered.
Yeah. And then another thing that always falls within the what might have been category that I certainly think about a lot with racing, especially when we lose younger horses that we've lost. And it seems like in the last week or two we've lost some incredible ones. Dortmund, Zippy Chippy, who you have a story about.
Yes, that's Zippy Chippy. For those of you who aren't familiar, is a beloved horse who went 0 for 100 on the racetrack. He never won a race, and it became part of his legend eventually that the horse was just never going to race. I mean, never going to win. And he, it became part of his legend. He, athletes would race him on foot because can the worst racehorse in the world beat a wide receiver or beat a standard bred and all that kind of stuff. And he became very beloved, and he was eventually retired to old friends at Cabin Creek up near Saratoga Springs, and people could visit him. And he was a grumpy old man, but he would pose for a selfie from time to time. I posed with, if you were very brave. He was a biter. He was not afraid to bite you in his crabby old age. And I took a selfie with him at one point, and he stuck his tongue out for it, and then he proceeded to bite me on the chest. I absolutely deserved it, and it was a great honor. I have no regrets over it. I got a selfie with Zippy Chippy.
Exactly. Sometimes that's a cost.
Yeah, no,
You know.
that's I knew what I was getting into, and I knew that he was he was old. He didn't have a lot of teeth left, but the ones that he did still worked.
And then we lost Lauban. It's about a year ago. That one is still kind of, it's odd. They were trying to improve his fertility.
They were more trying to improve his energy, I believe.
Okay.
Lauban was red hot at the time. His first crop of runners was electric. He was standing in New York for his first few seasons. His runners got to the track and they won a bunch of stuff. Lauban's the son of Uncle Mo, and there was just a run of like all the sons of Uncle Mo at stud were doing fantastic. So he moved to Kentucky. He was sold to a new partnership, and he was covering a ton of mares because everybody wanted in on him, and he just didn't have it in him to cover as many mares. And he was given something to help boost that he did not react well to, and he died very quickly afterward.
So now that sparked a commentary regarding thoroughbreds allowing artificial insemination rather than live covers.
Yes. So
in their breeding.
So thoroughbreds are somewhat unique in that to register for their stud book, everything has to be live cover. So the stallion has to be in the same room as the mare. They have to, do everything as nature intended, to keep my words very careful.
Yes.
And that's the only way. You can't do sort of, in vitro fertilization. You can't use artificial insemination where, you collect semen from a stallion and insert it into a mare who could be hundreds of miles away, like you can for most other racing breeds. Quarter horses, standard breds, Arabians all allow different forms of artificial insemination, embryo transfer. For thoroughbreds, there's only one way to do it, and there has been some concerns over whether if you're not going to put a cap on the stud book, are you running stallions into the ground, breeding them as many times as they need to, because it's a taxing process. And some stallions can be doing it 3 or more times a day. That's a lot. But there's also something to be said about genetic diversity. All those other racing breeds that I mentioned that have artificial insemination, because it's the barrier for entry for the stallions is so low, because you can get semen to any state that you need to, the genetic diversity isn't very good. So you have a lot of pedigrees. There's a handful of stallions that breed everyone, and eventually you're going to kind of run out of places to send your stallion because it's related to everyone, and that's not good. Right. So I'm a proponent of live cover with a stud book cap, which was implemented for a brief time by the Jockey Club, but that got warded off by breeders. I don't necessarily agree with that. And I don't know, if it were like that and you could spread out genetic diversity a bit, I'd be fine with it. As it stands right now, it's a lot more free market. I prefer it as live cover. I can see why people think it's easier on stallions for artificial insemination. It probably is, because there's not as much of a risk factor, but I think you have long-term consequences that would be tough to walk back without making significant changes that the business doesn't want to do.
I think if some might see artificial as a way to maximize numbers, and so they may actually do more than 3 collections a day, and you still have to collect it.
Yes. And I mean, you can get more out of one collection, more foals out of one collection than a typical live cover mating, but still you gotta get it somehow.
That is an interesting job, because if you've seen well, I'm sure you have seen them, the workers who deal with the stallions and mares, they have helmets.
Oh yeah.
They have chest covers. They have pads on their elbows and their knees.
It's a physical process for everyone involved.
Yeah. And there's a little guy who deals with the mare first.
The teaser, the poor unlucky teaser who job is basically just to arouse the mare and then leave.
Yeah. So yeah, it's there was one of the after American Pharaoh's Triple Crown the year after, Tara Lipinski and Johnny Weir, or Tara Lipinski visited Ashford
Mhm.
or Colmar, whatever it's called, and she got to watch him at a breeding,
Mhm.
and she was shocked and driven to her knees. And it was one of the funniest things, her reaction, because apparently she'd never seen horses in flagrante delicto.
Good word
However you
choice.
pronounce that word. But yeah, it's very interesting.
I grew up breeding horses on my parents' farm, so it was nothing new to me. But I can understand why someone who's not used to seeing that would be,
Yeah,
not sure what they're seeing. It's it's how every horse is made, but you don't necessarily think about it until you see it.
yeah. And my great grandfather had ponies,
Mhm.
and he had a few stallions amongst the herd. And so every now and then, what are they doing, Grandpa?
You'll know when you're older.
Yeah. So, and then of course we lost Medina Spirit very suddenly. I don't recall ever seeing, was that a heart issue?
I forget exactly what I believe they attributed it to a heart issue.
They said that they thought it was most likely to be cardio or pulmonary in nature, but there was nothing that they could see about the physical tissue of the heart that explained to them exactly what the problem was, which is not an uncommon finding at all.
Right.
In circumstances where the horse has either had some sort of cardiac issue or some kind of like pulmonary hemorrhage. They present kind of similarly once the horse is dead and the heart isn't beating anymore. Obviously, it's difficult to see if there was some sort of arrhythmia or anything else going on. All you could really tell is if there was any sort of physical deformity of the heart, and they did not find that. But that's, not an unusual thing.
And it was after a workout.
It was at the very end of a workout. Yeah.
It was like right at the finish line.
At the finish line. Yeah.
And then of course, Popcorn Delights, who was the who played Seabiscuit in the 2003 movie.
He was a good horse. He was anytime that I took a tour at Old Friends, which were just down the road from, Popcorn Delights was always one of the centerpieces because Seabiscuit is such a, if you're at Old Friends, you probably know about the Seabiscuit movie, and it's easy to impress people, say like, this is one of the main horses that played Seabiscuit. And they used multiple horses, but they were able to sort of nail down like which parts he was specifically in, so you can go back and watch those. And I forget what they are. I couldn't tell you which ones, but I remember they do make that part of the tour. And he's he's a very affable horse. He's a movie star, and he knew it.
And wasn't it his pasture mate who shows you his tattoo? Or was he? That was him, or no, that was his pasture mate. Yeah.
Yes, it was a pasture mate.
I can't remember his name, bless his heart, but
neither can I. Good horse though.
Yeah. And I think I remember reading that was something that Delights kind of didn't appreciate because it was taking his attention away.
Well, I mean, when you're a movie star, you want to be seen.
And then of course Alphabet Soup, and I truly worried for Michael Bluen when Alphabet Soup passed. Because next to War Emblem and Silver Charm, this was one of Michael's favorites.
Alphabet Soup was such a fan favorite. He's one that, just a very white colored gray, and just very, to borrow a phrase from another departed resident of Old Friends, very charismatic. He, he just had that look to him. He had that eye. He was very, approachable, and he looked like a unicorn. I don't know how else to say it. Just, he had the perfect look that you would want for a resident of Old Friends to look, just what you dream of a racehorse to look like. And it was a very good sire too. I had a lot of respect for Alphabet Soup at stud.
And he was kind of an unlikely winner because he wasn't a blue chip high dollar breed horse. He was acquired for a very reasonable sum of money if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I
And
think you're
won
right.
races I don't think people thought he could have won.
Yeah, he won some of the biggest races out there. He was a legitimate horse. He did fantastic.
So proving it doesn't have to be an American Pharaoh or a Justify. It can be Zippy Chippy and still do well.
Oh yeah, that's, it doesn't matter whether a horse was, the Kentucky Derby winner or ran in the lowest levels. It's amazing the ways that a horse can touch people's lives, multiple people's lives, who barely made an impact on the racetrack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then of course Dortmund, son of Big Brown. He was one of my favorites. Big Brown was one of my favorites. When you posted the article on Twitter, I was in the lunchroom and I saw it and I said, "Oh my God." And everybody's like, "Lisa, are you okay?" I said, "Dortmund died." "Who's Dortmund?" Like, "Oh, one of my other interests is horse racing." But I got to tell people that I work with about. So it was a very interesting opportunity to let people get to know me a little bit better.
Yeah.
But he was good.
He was. I forget what exactly happened with him. I think he got a twist in his
small bowel torsion.
Yeah.
He was
like
digestive.
Yeah, that's one of the awful things about horses, that they're really good at finding ways to die. Like at any age. I think he was only 10 years old. But that's the kind of thing that's not an old horse thing. That's not a young horse thing. That's sometimes a horse is in the right place at the right time and it happens thing.
Yeah.
And that's one of the terrifying things about horse ownership, is that you just never know when that might be your time.
Yeah, I think that the digestive complications are the most frightening part, because sometimes there's no sign that there might be something wrong. It just happens.
Yep.
So
the frightening thing is that colic symptoms kind of look the same no matter what the cause is. So you start seeing your horse do some kind of weird stuff that is like classic colic, and you're like, okay, does he have a bit of grain sort of caught someplace in his intestine? We just sort of need to get things moving, or like, does he have an intestine that's twisted and I need to get surgery?
Right. Exactly.
I mean, usually the more serious causes are more serious pain responses. So, I mean, you do have something of a clue, but the scary thing when you're in the middle of trying to sort of figure out, do we need the vet? Do we give some oral medication and see how it goes? Is that there's always that sneaking possibility of like, this could be it. And, or it could be nothing. Blueberry actually had a colic a few weeks ago that resolved with medication. It was oral medication, so it takes a while to kick in. And he wasn't super dramatic, but he was kind of like, low key, I may be dying for like 30 minutes. And then at minute 31, he's like, I'm fine. What are you staring at me for? And I'm just like, you're giving me an ulcer.
But and it's not the horse, it's you. Because you start going into worst case scenario brain.
Yes.
And, probably trying to keep it together. And inside you just want to go curl up in a ball and cry.
Yeah, you have to sort of, I think part of horse ownership it's got to be, I assume, not that unlike having kids, where you just have to have a mode you snap into where like, your brain is doing that, but you can't let that take you over. It has to be very triage of like, okay, let's check this. Did he eat? Did he poop? What do I see in the stall? Do I have oral Banamine? Do I want to call the vet now? Do I want to try this? Do I want to try walking him? And you have to just sort of be very logical about it. But then, afterward, what I run into is then after it's all over, then I'm kind of paranoid about what if it comes back, then the emotion back in luckily after you're sort of through the process of actually dealing with the issue in front of you. I don't know how vets do it, because that's just there all day, every day. I don't know how they don't just panic at some point during every single day, but that's their job. So I guess that's why you become a vet, in part, I suppose, that you must be good at a crisis, but it's definitely stressful. And colic, I think one of the important things to understand too for like non-horsey people is that like colic can happen in so many different ways and has nothing to do with the level of care of the horse. Something as simple as like the spring grass coming out, I think is probably what got to Blueberry in his case. And or a weather change or something can be enough
Right.
to set them off.
Right.
So it's
That's-
so upsetting when it happens, but it also means that like there are some limited things you can control to reduce the risk, but then there's other things that you don't have any control over. And you
Right.
have to sort of ride it out.
I mean,
go ahead.
I've heard of people, their horse has colic because they drank water too fast and ingested air.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they've actually disproven that one.
Oh, okay.
That was believed for many years, and so there were people that would not let their horse drink too soon after exercise, but they've researched that one pretty thoroughly and decided that like, no, you're probably good. That was probably based on the idea that people will sometimes feel a little crampy if you drink really cold
Okay.
water when you're really hot, but they don't work quite the same way. So
Okay.
as long as you don't let them go too crazy and drink like an entire bucket without stopping, like you're probably okay to just sort of taper it. And that's what they do with the racetrack. So funny enough, Blueberry likes to take short little sips after working out, and then he wants to take a break and then take short little sips, because that's what they sort of teach them to do as they're cooling out from a race, which is actually a good thing hydration wise. But
I had a friend who swore that was what caused.
Well, and it's sometimes
no, it's not recent. This was many years ago, but she swore.
Well, and it could have been more related to like whatever exercise they did right before drinking the water. We just had that horse. Oh gosh, why am I blanking on the name? Midnight Bourbon. Yeah. And Steve Asmussen's barn. And I don't think that we don't have the necropsy back, so we don't know exactly what happened, but it sounded like the horse worked out and started colicking as he was cooling out. Probably did the same thing workout wise that he did every day, but maybe something
that day
shifted around in the process of moving. If he had sort of more gas in his intestine and things were a little more blown up, and then you go to work and something doesn't stay where it's supposed to be. I'm not really sure what they'll find out, but they did say it sort of came on quickly and there wasn't much they could do, which sounds a lot more like a torsion to me versus a gas colic. But I mean, we'll have to see. But that was an exercise that followed exercise, so you do kind of wonder, like, okay, did they just do something weird in the process of exercising? Like, it's very stressful when you look at a horse's like GI system and you look at all the twists and turns that the intestine takes. It's really kind of amazing that they don't have problems more often than they do. Frankly, I explained this to a non-horsey friend once, and she was just kind of like, how have they as a species survived? And I'm like, that is a valid question.
That is a legitimate question. Yes.
And their digestive system only goes one way.
Yes.
So, that can cause issues.
Yeah, if they eat something that doesn't agree with them, they don't have a lot of choices about what to do with that. And unlike cows who have like the 4 stomachs, they can break down pretty much anything you throw at it. Theirs is not that sophisticated. It cannot handle stuff that it's not used to in the same way, which is part of the challenge.
Yeah. So, and then of course, Green Light Go was another recent one. And I kind of wonder, Joe, what about sire lines and these potentials for these younger stallions that we've lost?
Well, that's a good question. Actually, one that I think is very impactful is Midnight Bourbon, because he is a son of Tisnow, and Tisnow is, and I guess was since he's pensioned now, one of the last sort of hopes for the direct male sire line that includes Manowar. I believe it's the Godolphin Arabian is the sort of base sire, the foundation sire that he was the last major component of. And Tisnow really doesn't have that knockout stud in North America. And there really aren't any other sort of offshoots of that are serious significant. There's some regional ones, some in like, Korea and elsewhere. But in terms of like actual mainstream Kentucky stallions, Tisnow was about it for this particular sire line that had become quite obscure. And he doesn't really have that good heir apparent yet, like a son who's going to take over the reins and, leave it onto the next generation to keep going. And Midnight Bourbon was as strong a shot as he'd had in a long time. He was classic placed. I believe he was a grade 1 winner. He was going to go stand at stud somewhere and get a lot of mares. And, that's gone now.
Right.
And I mean, I believe Tiz now still has a crop of 2-year-olds going. Like they're drying up pretty quickly at the very least. Like his opportunities to, get that son at stud that's going to be his heir apparent is getting smaller by the day, and he's already kind of proven that he's not necessarily a sire of sires. So we could have just seen the last hope for an entire foundation sire line go with him.
Right.
And that's kind of a bummer because, I was talking about earlier genetic diversity. Tisnow was one of the biggest outcrosses in the entire business. Like you could send any mare that had been sort of bred to, sexy commercial pedigrees that everyone recognized, send them to Tisnow, who can get good runners and have an outcross and be fine.
Right.
That opportunity is not necessarily there anymore.
Right. But he does seem to have left some broodmares.
Yes, excellent broodmare sire. We mentioned Tiz the Bomb earlier. That's one that's out of a daughter of Tiz now. He's had a lot of good daughters. Like he's going to extend through that, but the sire line, the direct male, like this is the father, this is the father, this is the father. That's something that people really pay attention to, and that's going to get a lot harder to find nowadays, especially after Midnight Bourbon's death.
Right. And then Dortmund, he was in Korea. I don't know if I've seen any runners from him.
He stood in Maryland for 3 seasons, I think, and he didn't get a lot of attention there. I forget if he had some sort of medical issue or if he just wasn't very popular, but he didn't have a whole lot of runners or he didn't have a whole lot of mares, didn't have a whole lot of runners. I think he's got 7 starters right now. His oldest foals are 3. He's got 1 stakes place runner, and that's about it.
Right. And then we're also seeing the last crops of Empire Maker and Pioneer of the Nile.
Both of whom have a starter in the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah.
We'd mentioned Messier being a son of Empire Maker, and then Pioneer of the Nile has Tawny Port, who won the Lexington Stakes a couple weeks ago, heading into the Derby. He's a son of Pioneer of the Nile.
I think this might be his last crop because he died in 2019.
I'd have to do some mental math, and I'm not good enough at math to do off the top of my head. I think he's got, let's see. I think he's got one more crop
he
to
should
go.
have one more crop.
Yeah.
You're right. I forget that they're a year gestation or 11-month gestation.
Yeah, I usually have to carry the 1 with that just to make sure I've got the numbers right.
So yeah. And Empire Maker's 2022. So he should have 2 more crop 2020. So he's 2 more crops, I think.
Yeah, it was a real shame with Empire Maker because he started in America. He was fine, but really wasn't meeting up to expectations. So they sold him to Japan for a few years, and then he caught fire in the US. Had champions, did really well, and then they had a big effort, like multiple parties, to try to bring him back here to stand at Gainesway, and then he died only after a few years at stud, and that was, a lot of people were very sad about that.
Yeah. And then California Chrome is in Japan.
Correct.
He didn't make quite a mark.
Yeah.
At TaylorMade.
Yeah, there were some people who kind of doubted whether he would be able to pass on his ability at stud because he was of pretty obscure pedigree himself. And you don't typically see that get passed on to another generation if you happen to have one that was a freak like Chrome was. Tisnow is probably the exception to that. Like Tisnow was probably what they were aspiring to with California Chrome. Tisnow is a pretty regional pedigree, all things considered. Very prolific broodmare, but in terms of the sire, not as much. It was a very good cross, but didn't really do much outside of that. I think that was kind of the milepost for California Chrome, and he just never quite hit that. They were probably smart to sell early when he still had, some potential, because his runners have not rung the bell.
Yeah, I have very, very rarely ever seen a California Chrome.
Yeah. And he might do better over in Japan. There's a long, long history of stallions going over there from the US and having a fantastic career.
Right. Crown Pride's the Sunday Silence.
Yeah. Sunday Silence is the milepost of that. Dreyfong, who was a very good sprinter a few years ago, is the leading freshman sire over there.
Yeah.
So, the Japanese program is an extension of the American program. And I think that's part of the reason why they can do so well on a national stage, is because they're they're buying our best mares. They're getting some of our best stallion prospects. They're, it's essentially an American program.
Mm-hmm. So maybe in a few years, California Chrome might have a Japanese contender.
Oh, that'd be wild. I'd love to see that.
Yeah. So, well, any final thoughts from either Natalie or Joe?
It's going to be a crazy week. Stay tuned.
Natalie?
Yeah, we'll be as selfishly as turf writers. We'll be glad to get to the end of Saturday. It's the craziest week all year, but hopefully our listeners will tune in to NBC and enjoy the sort of the main weekend where horse racing is spotlighted through the year. It should be an interesting show.
Yes, and when Tim Layden steps down at NBC, I think Joe needs to start writing.
Oh boy,
those pieces, because you're writing. I mean, Bill Knack could make me cry, and so can you, and so can Tim Layden.
Oh my gosh, like Tim is not allowed to retire. Like I hope you get that gig and everything, Joe. Like I love you, but Tim is not ever allowed to retire because he's just like
that's fine.
Absolute perfection.
Like he is the one guy who like we both have posters on our wall for who we look up to. Like we want to be him when we grow up.
Yeah, can't. He's like, it's always the classic thing of like meeting your idol or something. Like I haven't actually like officially met him, but like he's around in press boxes, and I'm just like, oh my god, there's Tim Layden, and I proceed to walk into a doorway or something. Oh my god, he's so good. He's just so good at everything that he tackles.
You got one heck of an attagirl from Tim Layden.
He did email me after I got the 2 eclipses, and I was
no. I'm talking about the Bodie Express Preakness.
I don't think he said, the poor man. I think I just sort of like shouted at him and then ran in the other direction. Like I was trying to track down the pony rider who had picked up Bodie Express, who dumped John Velasquez at the start, ran off. And the trouble was that he ran the whole race. They weren't able to catch him. He galloped out with the field, and then he turned around and came back and ran at all of us, which was terrifying because if you were on the track, I did not get onto the track surface because I knew he was still out there, but a lot of people did. And they thought that he'd been picked up, and they didn't realize that he was loose, and it was too loud to really, I was like yelling at people and pulling people like, get out of the way. And so finally the one pony rider caught him right in front of the stands and was, the biggest hero that anyone had. And I just sort of spotted like people were everywhere. People were trying to figure out what happened. I was trying to figure out where the pony rider went. I was trying to figure out where the horse went, make sure that everybody's okay. And Tim Layden and I just sort of look at each other, and I just sort of shouted like, "This is insane!" And I ran. That's a great way of introducing yourself. Really smooth there. Like, the poor guy.
Yeah, Bodie Express is one of those he was a horse having a great old time.
He messed with that pony so much. He just like he didn't want to be caught, ahead of the race anyway. And then when she was really trying to get him after the gallop out, because it was finally safe to approach him, he wasn't in the field anymore, so they were kind of limited in what they could do as long as the race was running. But when they really started to try to go after him, he was just toying with them, and he really did successfully go from like just a blind bolt at some point, screeched to a halt, turned on his hind end, and ran the other direction at some stage. And I thought, oh my god, he's going to do this. Like he's already been doing this for I don't even know how many miles he's logged at this point, but like he's just going to keep doing this. He's not tired enough to stop. And it was Kay Marie Kreidel who picked him up with one of her many really excellent skilled ponies. And man, like she had to stretch all the way out of the saddle to get him too, because he was just not going to make that easy.
Right. And I think that was his inner dog, because dogs will do that.
Yeah, it was a little dog-like actually.
Yeah,
he was taking such joy in the situation. Like,
and when
so
you
hilarious.
just they'll get close enough where you think you can get them, and then they'll be like psych and sprint out so that you can't reach them.
That was definitely what he was doing. And it was more amusing after, we'd gotten through the whole thing and nobody even squished in the moment. It was just like, he's gonna eventually run somebody over because he's not gonna let them catch him.
Yeah,
it was quite something.
So, but yeah, that is if it ever comes to that, I nominate Joe.
I don't know.
And I will write to NBC tomorrow.
Like his Tim Layden's piece on maximum security and that time between the finish and the disqualification is one of the most intense and moving pieces of like horse racing media production that I've ever seen. Like very few things that I read or watch in racing give me goosebumps, or like,
Yeah.
especially after one or two readings, reviewings. But that's the kind of thing that's like basically our psych up mix. Like if Natalie and I know that we need to like do something great, like that's the thing we watch to see what greatness is. That was so good.
It was so
perfectly captured the
complicated.
moment.
Yeah, like he captured what it was like to be there, but it was just such a complicated situation, and yet he was able to not just make you feel something, but also include all of the many different moving pieces that were going on in that moment. And like as somebody who deals with like the investigative and regulatory side of things all the time, like that's very hard to do, especially when you're talking to a lay audience, as he always is through NBC. So
on television,
yeah, and you have a limited time space, and you know, it's just he's got a lot of sort of different elements that he has to deal with whenever he does one of those essays that gets read in the background of like one of the video montages, and like that is way harder than anything that we have to do, and he does it so well. It's just really impressive, and it's just great to experience that as a fellow writer.
But I think in journalism, I think turf and sports writers are the only group that have held on to the language and the use of language that used to be common for all walks of life in journalism. And now newspaper articles, I mean, read your local newspaper, you'll probably find grammatical errors and spelling and punctuation, and like nobody really cares. But sports and turf writing, y'all still care and produce a really great product.
You can see the poetry in it, and that helps to, you know, create things and find inspiration very, you know, I won't say easily, because, you know, writing is hard, but, you know, it's clear to see what's in front of you and what's important and what makes it sort of significant. And that's, you know, perhaps harder to find at a local, you know, drain commission meeting or something. You know, we're fortunate that we're in a field where inspiring things are happening on a regular basis, or inspiring are things that are at least inspiring to write about, even if they're, you know, sort of deflating and horrible. At least they're, you know, things that you can, you know, find it within yourself to describe with, you know, prose and just creativity that we might not necessarily be able to find elsewhere.
No, and it doesn't happen in news writing anymore. And maybe part of it is the audience is thought to be not very bright and not very focused and not very able to cope with much more.
Well, but I think there is something to be said for writing for a very specialized audience. If you're reading a horse racing publication, you probably know at least a few things about it, so you can take liberties with what you're saying, and that you don't have to, you know, speak to the lowest common denominator. You can, you know, sort of bring your reading level up with the audience. So, you know, if I wrote for the New York Times, USA Today or something, I'm not explaining I'm explaining the race to someone who watches one race a year, whereas I have the ability to write to an audience that watches races every single day.
True. I'll give you those points.
I will take them.
So, well, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me on this Sunday afternoon.
Well, thank you for having us.
And you have your crazy week coming up. Is it all week, or is it just Thursday, Friday, and Saturday?
Well, the post position draw happens tomorrow, and obviously, you know, any sort of last minute news of defections will be, you know, that much more critical throughout as the week goes on. I'm actually covering a law conference here in Lexington, sort of as an added layer to the Derby stuff going on in the background, which is going to be really interesting. But it's just kind of a lot of different moving pieces to the week. And then, you know, Friday, Saturday are the really long race days, as far as having just the largest number of graded stakes races across the different tracks. Because of course, Churchill's where everybody's watching, but there are other tracks that have graded stakes on Friday, Saturday also, and we got to pay some attention to them. So it ends up just making for a very long and complicated couple of days at the end of a long and complicated week.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, because you get so many once a year people who come out to the racetracks around the country, like a lot of tracks are running live dates that, you know, are either running live dates, starting their meet, ending their meet, or running one of their biggest cards on Kentucky Derby weekend because they know that they have a live audience for perhaps the only time they will all year. So everyone pulls the stops out, whether you're Churchill Downs, whether you're Belmont Park, or whether you're, you know, Mount Pleasant Meadows. Like, usually you're doing something cool on Derby Day if your live meet's going.
Right. I think Fairgrounds has got something similar going this weekend. The next weekend, rather. So, yeah. Well, Haiku Handicapper, do you have a date, or is it still to be? Of course, I think you'll post it on Twitter.
Oh, it'll be all over the place. I'm shameless with my promotion of that. I think we're still trying to nail down a date for that. I still need to figure out who I'm actually going to put on top. I would expect Tuesday or Wednesday, but I don't want to make promises on that. I got to speak to our editor in chief about that.
All right. So, well, it has been lovely having you both. And you actually do work very well together.
People often ask how we do it, and I don't know, but we've been doing it forever, and it just seems to work. So
I could not work with my ex. We worked together at one time when we got married. I had to go find a job someplace else because I didn't want to spend that much time with him.
we hear that a lot. We also work from home, so I mean, we're really around each other all the time.
Okay.
But I think it's been like that we haven't always worked for the same publication for most of our relationship, but we've always been, or almost always been, working primarily from home, just sometimes for two different publications. So it kind of wasn't that big of a transition really when he came over to the Pollock Report as far as that side of things went.
Actually, it's been kind of an advantage because now we're sort of working together on things as opposed to I'm doing my thing, you're doing your thing. And,
right.
You know, I can't or shouldn't be helping you with your thing.
Right.
Right. You can work together and not lose a job.
Yep.
Right.
So, and there's no worry of scooping somebody.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think we only had a couple situations where that potentially came up before, because he was so focused on Bloodstock and I had sort of my other little niches. So we didn't cross over that much. I can think of like one time where like I had to go into my office and close the door and work the phones, and you had to go to the other end of the condo and work the phones because we were both kind of knew something, and I don't even remember what it was. We knew something was going on.
Yeah.
And like we were each the appointed person on it for our respective publications, and we're like, well, this is weird.
Anyway, I'm going to this room.
I'm gonna go over here and talk quietly into my phone.
Don't knock.
Yeah. I'll see you when I see you.
Well, it works. Y'all make it look easy. And I admire both of you very much.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm going to say, based in fact, y'all are my favorite guests.
Oh.
Or among my favorite guests. And I can also say this is the only true crime podcast that has 2 Eclipse Award winners as guests.
Well, I can tell you as someone who, lives and works with Natalie, like living with Natalie is like living in a true crime podcast all the time for all the investigatory stuff she does. Like, it's just, what episode are we on today? That's you picked the right person to have on the show.
Yeah. Now that would be interesting. Natalie, have you ever thought of branching into a podcast?
I don't know where I would find the time. I really love listening to podcasts. I was like, all over. I was listening to podcasts before Serial, just to date myself. Like I think I'm one of the original cool kids. And I really enjoy consuming them, but I don't know where in the world I would find the time. The closest we kind of get is the Friday show, which is not formatted as a podcast, but is like essentially it's not a video podcast. I hate that phrase. Like, you're either a video or you're a podcast, for goodness sake. But that's sort of like our talking head video, which ends up working a lot like a podcast, and that people turn it on and probably, hopefully, do not stare at both of our faces the whole time. And that's kind of enough of a production each week to just figure out, oh God, what are we talking about? Okay. Are we having a guest? Like that's sort of enough for me to handle. But and it's not nearly as fun, I feel like, probably to put the pieces together after the fact. I think Joe sort of enjoys watching me unfold a story as I'm trying to figure out what happened. But by the time I would be able to, in my particular sort of venue, to put it onto a podcast, it's kind of like cat's out of the bag already, because I've probably published whatever the final story is. And so then it's just kind of rehashing. It's not nearly as exciting as if you were there for each individual step.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the challenge reporting, is that it's kind of fun to do it when you're still not sure where the ending is, but you can't really tell anybody about it because you don't know where the ending is.
Yeah.
And then you just have the whole story, including the ending. So,
well, reach out to me if you ever have one of your stories that you want to bring into the true crime sphere.
Absolutely.
And because I like to deal with them after their like direct appeal is over, and
that's the
look at it
way.
that way. Yeah, because well, up until direct appeal is over, there's a chance there's people out there that don't know and don't need to be influenced one way or the other.
Right. And you may not have all the information, until you get to that point.
Right. So, all right. Well, thank you so much. And I am going to let you get back to your Sunday.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
And I will maybe reach out and we'll try and do this again for Preakness.
Sounds like a plan.
Sounds great.
All right. Thank you.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Based in Fact, a true crime podcast. If you like the show and want to know more, you can find us on Facebook or follow me on Twitter at O'BrienLN. This week, I want to give a quick shout out to Roberta Glass and Audie, who produced the wonderful intro for me, and to Audie, who produced the title page for the audio and video versions of the podcast. I could not do this as professionally as it seems without them. Kyle and I will be back next week to talk about a true crime case, which is yet to be determined. So check our Facebook page later this week. Until then, have a great week and stay safe. Bye.